So now let's think a little bit about our migration or what we're going to do. First off, I'll talk about, it's kind of more of a hybrid management, something that's called Arc. So within Azure Arc, it's a way of basically it's this lightweight agent that gets deployed on the server OSs themselves, whether it works for Linux, it works for Windows, and what it does is it gives a line of sight of those servers that you have on-prem into the cloud. Now, as you know, why are we talking about this? Again, you might leave it there, but it also allows you to start capturing information about it. So as you're starting to think about your move that you want to make, then you can make it, and you're not accessing those resources anymore. You have a better plan of what's going to happen. So understanding maybe the vulnerabilities of what you have today on-prem, the security gaps that I could fulfill today. If you're going to migrate tomorrow, don't worry about it. If you're going to migrate in a week or a month or later, you should absolutely do this. It's going to help you, again, get used to using the management tools they have inside of Azure. You're going to start to see the gaps that might create maybe a little more urgency to migrate, or at least kind of resolve those gaps with Azure today. So it's kind of part of the overall strategy and what you're going to do to migrate. Again, because as you're thinking about what servers or services you want to collapse, migrate, modernize, understanding where you are will help kind of motivate those decisions of where you need to go, in the short and long term. So Azure Migrate is a service inside of Azure. It's one key component to everything that you're going to go do. You might decide we're going to do an assessment and go, yeah, this is really not great. We're gonna need to modernize that a little bit, or hey, the kind of copy paste of the VM, restoring it. These are great things, and we want to go do it. But it also helps you figure out whether you rebuild it, whether you migrate it, what type of capacity am I really using, and what kind of guidance am I going to get? That Microsoft's saying that, hey, when you move it over here, maybe you don't need such a bigger VM. Maybe you do. Maybe you need more performant disk than you imagine. So it's a great place to start. These are engagements we do with our customers. So let's take a look at some other examples of these migrations. Some that we've talked about already. Hey, you have a web application, Windows, Linux. You're using, MySQL, SQL Server, whatever that might be, and you want to start migrating that into Azure. Again, here from a Azure IaaS, IaaS or whatever it is, infrastructure as a service, where we're using kind of common components. Hey, I've been doing VMs over here. I'm going to do VMs over there. It's your decision. There might be good reasons why to do it. Maybe it is web application, but you're using some third-party tools, and it only works like this, and it has to be installed. Okay, that's a good reason. The SQL Server, because of the kind of license, we can do hybrid use, or where there's so much customization in the SQL, like I said, cross database queries. Now in preview, that may not be the issue. We'll do this. And again, you could move this way and then later modernize it. I will tell you this, that a lot of times people just keep kicking that can down the road and say, oh, it's worked, it's fine, it's 2012 R2. Well, SQL Server, we'll just wait till it completely falls over and dies. Because again, you have to manage that server in a cluster in a high availability environment. You might have, there's a lot of great integrations between VMware to kind of extend out the applications that you have on-prem today in there. Some customers want to get off of it, some love using it. You can, again, use the tools to migrate yourself over there and even still use some of the licensing benefits you have with VMware along with Azure. I'm not a specialist in that, but it's one way to look at it. The other part is you might have a bank of virtual remote desktop servers that you use today. If you have Citrix today and VMware, you can leverage those same things inside of Azure to essentially leverage the licensing and capabilities and some of those other providers' rich feature sets, but you basically want to run it in Azure. Totally supportable. Migration tool will give you some guidance to go do that. Just another option to go do it. Now, when we start thinking about your journey that you're going to go take, let me tell you, there's the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework, and it's come a long way, and it's really good, and it is a framework. However, there are tools in it that can actually help apply a lot of the policies, things called landing zones. We'll probably do a whole nother topic on this, that allows you to create more manageable groups, and they actually call them management groups, And this requires multiple Azure subscriptions to make all of this work. Oh, does that cost more money? It does not. The subscriptions really is kind of the binding area of policy enforcement and structure. You have nothing inside of your subscription, it costs you nothing. You have 3, 10 different subscriptions because you really segment out your where the development team is, where our IT team is, our application production team, and we want to give them the access and controls they need, but we don't want it for everything. Management groups that can do this. So it's all part of this framework to go through. It's a lot to digest when we definitely use this with our customers on projects, but it's really based off of how complex does it need to be for them. And it gives you all this great guidance that you can go through. You can search for it. You can see this link here. We'll make this deck available. Screenshot it if you want. So there's a lot of good guidance, and it takes time, to go through it. There's a lot of details. So that's why we work with customers, understand what they need, and kind of scope it right for the things that they have to. Not that we're trying to leave stuff out for you, but sometimes it's a lot, to go through and figure out what you need to go do. In the end, you just want to migrate. But if you just migrate virtual machines, put in app services, you might be really missing out on the right way to secure it, meet your compliance, the right level of disk, networking, availability, multiple, regional deployments. There's more to that you really need to get into. So, sometimes you want to start with a good footing because it's a little hard to retrofit some of those areas afterwards. Specifically things like the subscriptions, the ARM templates. Some things don't migrate between subscriptions very well in ARM templates. Which one are they? There's a list of them. So then how do you find all those? So these are things that you kind of want to at least a very good start, and then you can really build on it as you move along. This is pretty much in the mind of ourselves here at Agile IT, and probably all of you as well. Lots of different points. Some of these things, they go quicker than others, but you really want to validate. It's like, man, I just want to move one virtual machine. Absolutely, you could. But what happens if it's done poorly? People can't connect to it. It goes down. You accidentally put a public interface on it. Maybe you did put in a public interface on it because that's what you need, but you didn't put anything in front, like an Azure firewall. Azure firewall is expensive. Maybe what you should have done is use the web application gateway, which will give you the web protections that you need at tremendously cheaper costs and actually better security. This is the things that we want to look at as we go through it. Not every project has every one of these pieces that are like day-long workshops, but they need to be addressed. And so one of the things that we look at is how do we slim this process through it. And by the way, Agile IT, we're a fast track ready partner, which means that we work with Microsoft directly for support and other things. We meet with them weekly. And one of the benefits to them is that if you have a migration for an application or something that kind of reaches a threshold, it changes, so you kind of reach out to us, we might actually be able to do part of your migration, either planning or getting you going, free of charge. Fast Track doesn't normally, where we actually do the work, but those are things we figure out together. But it's a benefit that you absolutely should use. You're not sure, reach out to us and we'll let you know. So just a few things on the Azure Migrate kind of part of it. And the assessment that it goes through, it's pretty impressive. Allows you to it will deploy an agent. That's the way it kind of works. And then it starts to assess it. And you want to give it time for it to start to assess it. You may want to do all of your stuff on-prem, another cloud environment, whatever that may be. And it'll start to give you some, some readiness. Are there some areas that need to be addressed? And again, take this with a grain of salt, if you will, because you might say, oh my God, that cost is like this. Sometimes, especially when you're going for an application, like let's say a line of business application that you wrote, or somebody wrote for you and deployed you, there's a couple things to think about. One is, they just had the code running on a box in an environment that they had. People connect to it, internally, all is good. And sometimes those applications weren't created with performance constraints or performance tuning that it could have. It's like, I'll just read that database every time I get a refresh on a page. It seems to work fine. probably a place where it's a little slow, but it doesn't use caching strategies where you can do, like a Redis cache server inside of Azure. Oh, that costs a little bit more money. Not really, because now it's not as busy, right? It's gonna be a little faster. Maybe your application's a mobile device application that calls into a web service. And and right now you might just, be going through that a little bit. Maybe if you cached it a little bit better, maybe the application's slow. Maybe I should take this application and distribute it across multiple sites within Azure, multiple regions, and use a more kind of globally, cached data service for the things it's trying to do. Most application developers, what do they need when they need a database? SQL Server. You don't need that same strategy going forward for some of them. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. It just depends. Anyhow, this is a great place where you can start to get those costs, so you can get a kind of view of what that's going to look like. And here's just another approach. You do an assessment. You have your virtual machines here. This is something Smart Hotel Web 1. There's a whole hands-on lab on this. Nice. It'll take you a long time to run it, but it's a good one. But here in this case, it's like, hey, we did an assessment of our on-premise environment. Where is it going to go to? Well, we did an assessment, kind of give us an idea of the cost, the VMs we'd want to go build. Maybe we're going to rebuild them out. Maybe we automated that and still do DevOps, whatever. But now we're going to go ahead and migrate the databases. We're going to migrate those VMs, and this is going to be our new entry point for our users. And so, again, it's assessing what you have. Again, we talk about apps here. If it's the other workloads, we kind of discussed that. So again, once you have that and you kind of look at your migrations, you get to see and hear how they're moving, how they're replicating. And again, it is copy, it is replica, because one of the things it's going to do is it's going to say, in this example for Azure Migrate is, hey, let's get that virtual machine that we have. We did an assessment. Now let's start replicating. The other server's still there. And when the time is right, when you've scheduled it out, and you can even test the migration to make sure, like, hey, is it working? Is it on? You normally want to get your business users to go, is everything in there working kind of the way you want? The routes are good, cool. Now we're going to update our DNS pointers internally to go to the new Migrate deployment. What do we do with the old one? Turn it off. It's most of the world's pain and desire and love is around DNS. You reroute it. Different ways to do the IP adjustments, different ways to do the public and internal IP, but that's essentially it. So you can have that transition, but again, you got to make sure it's the right disk, right? Make sure the right deployment, depending on how you had your licensing for your server. And you may want to use hybrid benefits that could be anywhere between 30 to some odd number, in terms of cost savings. All those things we'd want to address. And there is a database assessment. In the end, when you look at SQL Server, it hosts databases. It's the database that matters. It's not the server, it's the database. So some databases and applications, let's go right to Azure SQL, but it doesn't have to. You can have a virtual machine in Azure, built from the ground up, using something that's in the marketplace that they have that already has SQL in it. Makes it easy, includes the OS cost, includes the SQL cost, includes the no need for the SQL calc cost. So you can still do that, or you can move it to Azure SQL Service. You can do it back and forth. So lots of great ways that you can go do that. And again, it's a replica. Place where you want to do it is test, do an assessment of the migration, migrate the web application, migrate the database. It's out of sync. Who cares? You test it out, run it, see where you have to make changes. You see how long it took to replicate it. You can keep the replica, and then schedule out your deployment and cut over. So a lot of great tools here. Now here, I know it's busy, a little bit harder to read. You'll get access to this. You can see on the screen, screenshot it. And again, it's just another thing to look at of hey, when we have this line of business application, and I talk a lot about that because I really feel that the other servers, whether it's a file server, it's pretty straightforward. Migrate it to Microsoft 365 and or move it to Azure, services. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. Maybe for small exceptions of why you'd want to just completely lift that file server and put it in Azure. A couple of reasons why I would think that anybody would do that. One, my current hardware is about to just die. Okay, and I need it as is, copy paste up there, and I'll sort it out. The other strategy is because there's a lot of data on there I need as an archive, and I don't really need any of the compliance and security features, which is sometimes hard to believe, but sometimes it's large media files, and I just need to get it up there. You could copy paste it that way. There's another thing in Azure File called Azure File Sync, and it will replicate that data into the cloud, and then you can push that into another VM if you wanted to in the cloud. It's a nice way to kind of slowly get all that data out without having to have the whole file server done yet, because it has it. And the other part is that and the other route is you can use Azure File Services in the cloud endpoint, but keep in mind that the connection point is using the SMB 2.0 protocol, which means even though it looks like you can get to the web, you can't, and that's because all of your home and all of your office ISP providers prevent that specific protocol going over the internet. It's one of the biggest holes out there, so it won't work. So you still have to be able to VPN into Azure to make those things work. Anyhow, so those are things that kind of reasons why you would kind of quickly move it up there. Other places, really, it is about the line of business application that we need to go to.